Jordan.
Hello, my name is Annie O'Connell.
Hi, I'm Layla Krause.
Hello, my name is Franklin Ogunoroki.
Hi, my name is Daisy Boyatheos, and this is our History of Acting presentation.
Ancient Greek theatre originated in the 16th century BCE as a religious festival in Athens to honor Dionysus, the goddess of wine and partying. Featuring competitive playwriting, masked actors, and choruses that narrated the story. Greek theatre began as hymns sung, danced to honor Dionysus, the Greek goddess of wine, ritual, madness, religious ecstasy, and the theatre. Greek Poner, the thespian, was the first human to appear on stage as an actor playing a character in a play. He was often called the inventor of theatre. Greek theatre categorized into comedy and playwrights. The four greatest classical Greek dramas were the comic poet, Aristophanes, and the traditional poems that were made in Greece. Roman theatre originated in 36 BCE as a blend of Greek tradition and indigenous Italian performances. There were mass speculations furthering slapstick comedy, music, and famous writers like Polazzi and Terence heavily influenced the theatre. Roman theatre was born in 36 BCE, incorporating theatrical dances and games, adapting Greek tradition and comedy into in Italy, and replacing traditions with crowd-pleasing entertainment like main pantomimes across the globe. Roman theatre was freestyle blending, using concepts that were usually not used in traditional theatre. Performances were famously known for their freestyle movements, and many Roman actors, male actors, would gender swap to play the opposite sex. Medieval theatre emerged after the fall of Rome. From the 15th century CE, own words become prominent between the 10th and 16th century, when the Catholic Church revealed drama to teach biblical stories to a larger public. It involved commedia art embedded in the 16th century Italian was the first full performance from a theatre. It made use of unscripted, improvised, half-masked, and travel tropes that used physical comedy to detail working class crowds and royalty across Europe. Commedia translates to comedy of the performance. It was one of the earliest examples of acting from guilds to earn a living. The system evolved during the Italian Renaissance era and mid-1500s, marrying elements of carnival traditions and active Roman culture. Before the era of female roles were often played by men during this era. It involves a lot of performance, shock, and Elizabethan horror. African theatre is a blend of traditional storytelling, music, dance, and ritual, which has existed on the African continent for a millennia. Long before recorded classical history productions, Greek civilized formal scripted drama and Western-style theatre house only embedded much later, larger expand after the independence movement in the mid-20th century. Ancient African theatre did not use scripts. Instead, stories were live, sung, and danced. Performances communicated deep spiritual meanings with masked dancers often replacing some of the actors. After African performances actively engaged the audience, often turning spiritual into participants who co-created the narrative, combining music, rhythm, drama, song, dance, physical theatre into a single expression. Post-colonialism, Africa playwrights released their theatre heritage by combining Western structures with traditional indigenous, like music, rhythm, dance, and African culture.
Asian theatre started developing around the 15th century with styles like kabuki. After the Civil War was finally established and allowed to flourish around 1603, a dancer named Okuni decided to perform publicly in a makeshift stage. Eventually, she began to mix dance with plays and cross-dressing to create longer shows, and people began adapting her style and making increasingly longer plays set to music and often styled, including jokes and crude language and dancing and music. It was eventually called onakabuki. It was then outlawed and women weren't allowed to perform anymore. But after a long list of loopholes being outlawed, men's kabuki started forming. These plays often lasted 8 to 12 hours and dealt with historical stories mixed with dancing and spectacles, mystical creatures and special effects. These performances had heavy stage combat and were very physically demanding. They also had a play called No, which was very calming and ritualistic. This style influenced culture around Asia a lot. Next is Elizabethan Jacobean theatre and Shakespeare. This era lasted throughout the Renaissance. Under Elizabeth I, arts and culture flourished in Britain, as she enjoyed watching plays a lot. In Elizabethan theatre, we start to see the first professional troupes of sponsored actors that were sponsored by the Queen, nobles, or other high-class members of society. It was now completely religious. Since religious oppression was letting go in England, plays were now less religious as the church was split, allowing to greater freedom. With English nationalism rising, historical playwriters were very popular as plays were about Roman and Greek mythology. Acting troupes for groups of professional actors, men that moved around performing in different royal homes, until permanent theatres were constructed for the first time and licensed troupes such as the Leicester Men started performing at the Rose and the Swan and the Globe Theatre. So troupes didn't have to travel around anymore, and the production's values were very minimal. Props were used and costumes were always very detailed, and the scripts were very passionate. The most prominent playwright from this era was William Shakespeare, and he himself was in the Chamberlain Men. Shakespeare wrote around 37 plays and a number of poems and sonnets. His plays often categorized into histories, tragedies, and comedies. His plays and many others from the time are still very popular today. The next theatre style I will talk about is Victorian melodrama. Victorian melodrama was common in the 19th century. Melodramas appeared exciting, funny, and sad. They were morally simplistic, and their endings are satisfying for the audience, and there is a lot of musical accompaniment. It borrows from sentimental comedy, but it is way more about showing the audience a great time. Melodrama was popularized by the urbanizations of cities and lower classes wanting to enjoy the theatre too, as at this time it was quite literary. Originally, they had to be played with music, as there was a licensing problem in theatres, especially in London, where only 2 theatres were allowed to produce spoken word pieces, which means that other theatres had to play live music with their plays. These plays are authentic, saying exciting stories with obvious heroes and obvious villains, where the good characters get rewarded and the bad characters get punished, and they often have satisfying endings. The 6 stock characters in Victorian melodrama: the main villain, the sensitive hero, the persecuted heroine, the clown, and the faithful friend and the villain's accomplice. These characters are still very prominent today, and Victorian melodrama is obviously a huge influence in modern movies today. Stanislavski. He was born in 1863 in Russia, and he was the third practitioner that is really well known for his acting and directing skills. When he was 33, he founded the Moscow Art Theatre, and it ended up touring all throughout Europe and the US. Through his touring in the US film industry started to find the style of theatre endearing for its honesty. One of his goals throughout touring was to promote Russian theatres and writers. In 1938, he published a book called An Actor's Work, and it was awarded 3 times that year for his work. He then invented method acting. Method acting included not just reading your lines, but understanding what your lines mean. Where are you? What do you want? Etc. The second part of this is the goal. What makes an actor's performance interesting? It isn't achieving what they want, it's the journey they took to get there. The third part of this is suspension of belief, where you make yourself believe what you are doing. Stanislavski's techniques are still commonly used today and are very popular in theatre and in movies. The last practitioner I will be talking about is Brecht. He was born in 1896 and died in 1956. He was born in Germany, and because of what he saw, the violent takeover of the Nazis throughout World War II, this is often reflected in his pieces, as they are very political. Brecht rejects naturalism and uses techniques like multi-rolling, switching costumes on stage, sound effects made by people live on stage, narration, singing, placards. He did this so the audience would focus less on the characters and more on the actual message of the piece. He did this to make people think about important political issues, so they could think deeper about the issues and stop focusing on the story and the characters as much. He believed in making the familiar strange and the strange familiar. Until this day, many of Brecht's techniques, like music and singing, are still widely used today in theatre.
Theatre cruelty is an avant-garde theatrical concept developed by the French theorist Antoine Artaud in the 1930s. Artaud intended this cruelty not as physical violence, but as violence inspiring assault on the audience, using subconscious to shatter and complicity and reconnect people with deep emotions and sensory overload, and so they could perform heavily and not rely on verbal sounds or screams and chants. Spectators are often placed in the centre of the action or surrounded by the performance. The next one is Meyerhold. Meyerhold's system of acting was acting training and was developed by Meyerhold. The purpose of this was to widen the emotional potential and the theatrical theatre piece, and to express his thoughts and ideas that could not be easily presented throughout the naturalistic theatre at that period of time. The main components are motion force and momentum. The next one is Gruskovsky. The Gruskovsky method is an intense physical acting technique that strips away theatrical spectacle, like an extravagant set and costumes, to focus entirely on the connection between the actor and the audience. This is famously known as poor theatre actors. They're asked to treat their bodies and vocalise as scared vessels, using immense discipline training to expose their deepest unfiltered emotions, truth, without a mask of everyday habits. The key training techniques are plastic, which is a challenging series of movements originating from the spine that flows through the entire body. This helps the actors discover new ways to move more physically. Another one is corporals, really just acrobatic and bodily conditioning that goes beyond everyday movement to stretch the actor's physical capabilities and vocal resonance. The next one is Theatre of Facade. The Theatre of Facade was a post-World War II theatrical movement that explored the essential, meaningless and irritational of human existence, coined by critic Martin Islin. The genre rejected traditional dramatic structures. The key concepts and themes are existential dread, absence of plot, breakdown, and language that can tragic comedy. The next one, please. Postmodern theatre is an experimental movement that emerged in the mid to late 20th century. It rejects linear lines that narrates, and uses universal truths in favour of fragmentation, and breaks traditional boundaries between the performer and the audience. The key features include meta-theatre, rejection of grand narratives, intertextuality, and audience participation.
Steven Berkoff. He is an English actor, playwright, and theatre director who peaked in the 1970s and 1980s. Steven Berkoff created Berkovian theatre, which combines elements of physical theatre, total theatre, and expressionism. The next person I will be talking about is Caryl Churchill. Her most influential period was between 1979 to the late 1980s. Caryl Leslie Churchill is a British playwright known for dramatising the abuses of power, for her use of non-naturalistic techniques, and for her exploration of sexual politics and feminist themes, who is primarily associated with the late 20th century to present day. Next slide, please. Sarah Kane was born on February 3rd, 1971, and died on the 20th of February 1999. Her highly influential and controversial career as an English playwright firmly belongs to the late 20th century. Sarah Kane's work is known for deliberately challenging audience sensibilities by confronting them with subjects that are commonly regarded as uncomfortable. So where are we now? The future of theatre lies in combining live performances with cinematic special effects, creating more immersive experiences for audiences. Productions such as Stranger Things: The First Shadow showcases state-of-the-art special effects, immersive sound lighting, and stage illusions to create experiences that feel almost cinematic. As technology continues to develop, productions like these may influence how theatre is created and experienced in the future.